Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of The Division 2. I played it on the Xbox One. It's also available on the PS4 and PC. So let's start with the story. The Division 2 takes place 7 months after the Division 1 and the events in New York with the dollar flu. But it turns out that the dollar flu wasn't the only thing. DC was hit with its own biological agent. And to put it simply, DC has fallen into this kind of interesting broken up communities. Some are willing to work together and some are just raiding monsters. Not actually monsters, but they don't really want to build for themselves, they just want to take from everyone else. Groups like the Hyenas, the True Sons, the Outcasts. The Outcasts are a little even more extreme because they want to continue spreading the virus. Your job as a division agent is to help rebuild society, essentially, by starting with the White House and rebuilding the government. You do this in a variety of ways by taking down enemy strongholds and completing missions to help not only the White House, but some of the other communities in the area. And I gotta say, not unlike most of these loot shooty games, it's not a super in-depth story, but it's enough to keep you going. The story feels stronger than that from the Division 1, which is important because, in retrospect, I feel like that was a fairly weak story and there wasn't a lot to move you forward apart from just playing and growing. As for the audio is much improved from the beta that I played. I never ran into the same issue of my gun just not making any noise whatsoever and losing audio in general. The sound effects were very well done. I thought the guns and the ambient atmosphere were excellent. I do wish there was a bit more music in the game, but what music there is well done and I like it. It adds to it when it does appear. Then you got the voiceover, which is okay. It's not great. It's far from the worst I've heard. It's still not the best I've heard. But that also just varies from person to person. As a whole, it's okay and serviceable, but that's because there are certain characters who are better voice acted than others. Now, as for the gameplay, this is once again one of those pseudo MMO co-op loot shooter type games. It's got its RPG elements, which you collect these things called shade caches. Those are points that you can use to upgrade certain abilities, unlock more storage, etc. I've got to say, and I'm just going to say it right now, the Division 2 is exactly what you want from these kind of games, in my opinion. It's shown a lot of growth from the Division 1, and it basically does everything right that Anthem did so very wrong. And I hate to make those comparisons, but I do feel like it's necessary and it's important to point out in this situation. There is no one central hub. There are places where you will go to collect missions, sell items, craft, do your traditional hub stuff, but you can literally just walk out of that hub and head down the street for half a mile and find something to do. You can invite your friends, you can place waypoints, you can mark missions and go do those missions without going back to the hub. You may or may not notice that I'm making some pretty heavy comparisons to Anthem right here, and again, I don't like to, but it's kind of necessary. The Division 2, not unlike the Division 1, is very much mission oriented, but you don't have to bounce around from hub to mission. You can just explore the world, and then do a mission if you feel like it while exploring the world. I love the fact that there are events going on in the world. You can roll up on a public execution, enemy propaganda, and disable those, prevent the execution, rescue hostages, etc. It's excellent that you can just do those things while exploring. Another thing that I really love is the variety of weapons. There are so many different weapons in this game that I really am just in love with it. I will say the variety of sidearms that I've found is not that impressive, but the variety of sniper rifles, DMRs, ARs, LMGs, shotguns, etc. There's such a wide variety in all those weapons that you will easily find something that you want to use. I personally found that I carried one of pretty much everything and would switch between them as necessary. As for endgame content, there are massive strongholds that are difficult to take down, as well as you can replay all the missions you would like to. But then there's also the Dark Zone, which is that classic PvE, PvP area. It is definitely tougher than it was in the beta, so that was kind of something that they clearly toned down for the beta, and I like that. I was kind of concerned about that when I was playing the beta, that they had toned down the Dark Zone a little too much. But it's still there, it's still where the best gear is, and there's missions that you do in the Dark Zone which I enjoy. Okay, calling them missions is a bit extreme, but there are smaller missions, we'll call them. They're not like the full-size missions outside of the Dark Zone. Teaming up with your buddies is a lot of fun, and at times a little necessary. There are certain enemies where if you don't have somebody covering you, they can be obnoxiously difficult. I'm specifically thinking of these guys who spray this foam on you that locks you up, and it just leaves you in the open to get fired on by all the enemies around you. Not one of my favorite enemies. They also added the loadout system, which means you can select certain guns and certain gear to go together. The problem I found with it is that if you find that a certain gun isn't working, you can't just switch to a loadout that has that gun. You have to go in and specifically select that gun, which it kind of renders the whole loadout system useless. But on top of that, the loadout system is very particular. It's linked to every single piece of gear. It's not like I want a shotgun here and an assault rifle here. It's that specific shotgun, that specific assault rifle. And in a game that is so loot based, when you're finding new weapons almost constantly, that doesn't really work with the system. I also need to point out that some of the enemy AIs are garbage, quite frankly. The way they move is just not realistic. You'll have guys with guns who will just kind of walk around the battlefield shooting you, and they'll honestly get as close as they would need to use melee, but not use melee, and it gets frustrating because it just doesn't make sense. And they can also do that while you're focused on somebody at the distance. You assume because they have a gun, they're not going to get at melee range, but then they do, and you end up getting murked. It's something you gotta kind of watch out for, and it's a little weird, quite frankly. As for the controls, I think it's better than the Division 1. I think the controls are far more responsive, the aiming works better, the way they're mapped is pretty much the same, but it still works very well. But I do feel like the aiming and shooting is more responsive, it's easier to control, it just works better, and that's very important. While this isn't necessarily like the uber real shooter, you still need the good controls, and this game does have very good controls. Lastly, the graphics. It's a good looking game. My biggest complaint I had while running around the world was the textures sometimes take a while to appear. I also like that there was a real character customization mode, and unfortunately though, I didn't love every aspect of it. I wish there were more options for hairstyle as well as facial hairstyle. The one I wound up with looks kind of like mine, but not quite. It looks a little weirder, quite frankly. The other thing I did notice while I was doing the character creation was that the eyes look really fucking weird, man. My only other real complaint with the graphics is that they could have put some more detail into the NPCs. A lot of them, when they're talking to you, they have zero facial expression. It's just moving their mouth. So I feel like they could have put some more work into that. I like the world that they have built. I think the enemy design is really good. I just like all the smaller details they've added to the world, like the animals running around, the way things have begun to become overgrown. I think they clearly put a lot of effort into it, and it shows. Apart from the small complaints I had, I didn't have some of the problems that I had in the beta with people stuck in T-pose. So to wrap this up, I gotta say that the Division 2 is like the looter shooter pseudo MMO that I'm really most into. While Destiny and Anthem have their upsides, I think the Division 2, A, launched with a lot more content, and B, they're clearly fixing it at a rapid pace. I ran into a problem for a while where my special abilities like my auto turret or my drone or even my seeker mine were not working. And by not working, I mean I would put them out and they would disappear within 5 seconds without being destroyed by an enemy. That was very frustrating, but they took the servers down, did some maintenance, did some patching, and next thing you know, it was working again. So they're clearly putting the effort in to keep this game going, and I think Ubisoft of all companies have proven that they are good at providing seasons of content, which is really more like a year-long season of content. They've done it with For Honor, they've done it with Rainbow Six. They're good at keeping their games going for an extended period of time. They're better at it than a lot of other companies out there trying this stuff. So to put it simply, I really enjoyed The Division. I think it's a full recommend. I loved it. Okay, so in the comments below, why don't you tell me if you played the first Division? And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share, subscribe. Have a good one.